Hello, and thanks for tuning in to Look Up Irish Edition. I'm your host, Finbar Markey. I'm joined this evening by Peter O'Donoghue. He's a special guest host this evening. Peter has joined us before. He's an activist from County Cork, and he's quite well known for speaking out on issues that lots of other people are afraid to touch, but to do so in a sensitive way. Thanks for joining us tonight, Peter.
Well, thanks very much, Finbar, for having me.
No
How are you all
problem.
keeping up in County Loud?
We're doing pretty well. We've just about got over our football defeat a few weeks ago, and we've licked our wounds enough, I think, at this stage to get back up on our feet. How's things down in County Cork?
Oh, we're good. We're good. We have, I suppose, Teddy McCarthy passed away the other day, the only man to ever win a football and a hurling All Ireland in the same year. So his funeral is happening at the moment. So it's a big loss to Cork, but other than that, we're doing well.
I'm sorry to hear that. Now, I hope he had good innings, as I say, that he had a good long run.
Yeah, no, he's late 50s. He passed away suddenly. So
All
it
right,
was,
he didn't actually. I'm sorry. I'm sorry to hear that now. Peter, we're going to look at a few stories that you've picked that you have interest in that's happened over the last week with an Irish flavour to it. And we'll look at some stories that I have picked as well. The first story that we're going to look at this week is news that has come out that seems to have a little impact in terms of how it's been reported in the mainstream or the corporate media and the public media. And that's about a massive drop in not only GDP, gross domestic product of the Irish economy, but also GNP, gross national product. We'll have a look at this headline from the Irish Examiner. Irish economy enters technical recession following unexpected 4.6% fall in GDP. Excluding construction, the globalized industry sector contracted by more than 18% in the first 3 months of 2023. Gross domestic product has decreased significantly more than expected following a contraction of 15.7% in multinational dominated sectors. New findings from the Central Statistics Office found that GDP fell by 4.6% in the first 3 months of 2023, with gross national product, which excludes multinational profits and repatriations, falling even more sharply by 8%. Those figures are phenomenal when you consider that when you look at international economic stories and you see a 0.5% drop, countries get really worried. We have a 4.6% drop in GDP and an 8% drop in something that's far more reflective of our economic outlook, and that's GNP and economic performance. Let's read on a little bit more in this story. This is the second consecutive quarter in which economic activity has contracted, fulfilling the technical criteria for a recession. In addition, final domestic demand, a measure of personal, government and investment spending, decreased by 4.9% in quarter one of 2023, reflecting the lower levels of investment in intangible assets. So that's the shocking story. You can read on yourself, you can search that out online, that story, and look at other stories relating to it as well. But in terms of the response of the Irish Minister for Finance, when this came out, despite a larger than expected fall in GDP, Finance Minister Michael McGrath welcomed a strong start to the year for the domestic economy, citing record low unemployment of 3.8% and growth in the construction sector. Mr. McGrath did, however, add that he was conscious of falling GDP, which he said reflected a fall in exports and specifically the globalised activities of the multinational sector. Multinational production can be extremely volatile on a quarterly basis and with large swings in patterns of recent years. Indeed, given the outsized role of the multinational sector plays in our economy, GDP is clearly not a useful measure of the living standards of domestic residents, says Michael McGrath, Minister for Finance. It's not that long ago that the government were saying that GDP was a great measure of how we're doing nationally in terms of our economy. What do you make of this story, Peter?
Yeah, well, I suppose the first thing that strikes me is one would be forgiven for being under the illusion these days that our economy is doing fantastically well because that's the way the media portrays us at the moment. Yeah, from what I can hear and see in the media, our economy is doing very well considering what's happening in the world. And then you have a story like this where GDP is down is four over 4% and
4.6%, yeah.
GNP over 9%. Is that true?
That's 8%, 8%.
8%. So yeah, the GNP is a more accurate reflection of the true economy of the country, and that's a phenomenal figure, and that there's no alarm about that. To me, it's quite strange that
Yeah.
first of all that the government wouldn't be alarmed about this, and second of all that the media wouldn't be alarmed about this either. Why is that?
And also there's massive um, expenditure occurring in certain parts of our economies and sectors, government service sectors, especially over the last year or two, in relation to people coming into the country, in relation to residing people in the country and getting homes for people and putting them up and things like that. So there is an increase in spending, I expect, in relation to that. And on top of that, we have these foreboding numbers, because as I say, when you look at news stories about other countries' economies, there's panic when there's a 0.5% fall in GDP or GNP. This is a 4.6 and an 8% drop respectively. And it's shocking. And the fact that the Irish corporate media and the public broadcaster is not voicing or giving people who have serious concerns about this voices and giving the airtime needed for us to give the government a good kick in the shin in terms of what's happening to our economy, and that over-dependence on multinationals, but also this over-dependence on international politics, which has to be having an impact as well. Peter, you wanted to lead with the next story, which is in relation to an announcement made this week by WHO, the World Health Organization, that they have finalized agreements on a world vaccine passport system, essentially. We'll just have a wee look at this story.
Yeah, so on June the 5th here in Geneva, the World Health Organization and the European Union, they announced a partnership regards a vaccine passport, a global vaccine passport system. So, yeah, I suppose just a little quote from that article there. The first building block of the World Health Organization's global digital health certificate network that will develop a wide range of digital products to deliver better health for everyone. So the World Health Organization is portraying this as fantastic news, and it is great. And I suppose we put this news in with the context of the new pandemic treaty that's coming here in 2024, where countries are signing up to basically let the World Health Organization take control if a pandemic should happen or take place. So in my mind, this is very concerning news. I suppose, first of all, we had the vaccine passport system, the digital vaccine passport system in place already. And from what I can see, they were of absolute no use whatsoever. They were probably the most, discriminatory system that was ever put in place in our world ever. It was a global system of discrimination, of segregation, of isolation for many people. And at the time, we were told to trust the science, and the science backs these digital vaccine passports. And with hindsight now, that we can see that these passports did absolutely nothing for the good of the health of the people of the world. So then I'm asking the question, why then, when the evidence is irrefutable that the vaccine passports did absolutely nothing positive, but were absolutely totally negative, totally discriminatory, why then is this system being implemented again throughout the world? Why are we even considering this?
It's been copper fastened, so it seems to be expanding from what was an EU system. We're going to listen to what the head of the World Health Organization has to say about it now, which was an EU system, and it's been multiplied out globally. We'll have a listen to what the head of the World Health Organization has to say in his announcement this week, and we'll come back in a wee minute.
The emergency phase of the COVID-19 pandemic is now over. Investments in digital infrastructure remain an important resource for health systems and for economies and societies at large. Like many countries, the European Union made significant investments in COVID-19 certificates to help people move around as safely as possible during the pandemic. The European Union certification system was used by all 27 EU member states and more than 50 other countries. Building on the success of the EU system, WHO is proud today to launch the Global Digital Health Certification Network. So thank you so much to European Union for the excellent certification system that you have transferred to us, and we have the chance to build on it. WHO will begin operations of the network today with the existing COVID-19 certificate as a global public good. Soon after, we will expand this infrastructure by incorporating other use, such as a digitized international certificate of vaccination, routine immunization cards, and international patient summaries.
So that was the head of the World Health Organization making an announcement this week of the global vaccine passport system based on the EU system itself. We're going to talk a little bit about why we're so concerned about so much power being put into the hands of the World Health Organization, which sounds like a pretty good, positive, altruistic organization until you start scraping beneath the surface and seeing who funds them and who actually controls them. And they admit that themselves. Just in what the head of WHO had to say there, Peter, any further comment?
Yeah, this is all being done. It's being portrayed as it's good for the citizens of the world and the people of the world, and they're going to take control of our health, basically, and take control of the decisions around our health. But in my opinion, it's totally undemocratic. It goes against absolutely everything that democracy stands for. It goes against people's individual freedom. It goes against the sovereignty of nations. It's, in my opinion, it's a control mechanism. And in my opinion, no government or no organization of any sort should be dictating what somebody puts into their body, what somebody doesn't put into their body. That's a person's individual choice and should always be that way.
It is a control mechanism, although that might sound a little bit Orwellian or dystopian. Its actual design is a control mechanism to control people's travel based on what vaccines they have, control their international travel. There is a reason why the World Health Organization should be questioned about things like this. As we said, it sounds all altruistic, and in a world which was functional and which didn't involve the whims and of people's emotions, such as greed, such as the desire for power. In a world where that didn't exist, maybe this wouldn't be such a bad thing. But we know that the World Health Organization is actually controlled by private billionaires and by private corporations, mainly drug production corporations, who certainly have their own interests above anybody else's interests, and the interests of their shareholders above the interests of the rest of the world. Now, you may say to yourself, oh no, here we go, here's the rabbit hole opening up. My goodness, some tin hats need to be brought out here. Conspiracy theory alert. Well, here is Margaret Chan, former Director General of the World Health Organization, and it's exactly what she says. Have a look at this.
You asked an excellent question. If I tell you, WHO as an organization, only 30% of my budget is predictable funds. Other 70% I have to take ahead and go around the world to beg for money. And when they give us the money, they are highly linked to their preferences, what they like.
That's some admission, isn't it, Peter? I'm not sure if that's the first time you've seen that video. What's your reaction to it?
Yeah, I suppose my reaction is there's nothing free in life. These huge pharmaceutical companies, they don't give money to the World Health Organization for nothing. They give money to the World Health Organization, so now that they have a say in the World Health Organization's policies and decision making, and we can see now where the decision making is going. People are going to be practically forced to be taking their drugs. So they have a market here now. They've got guaranteed customers. So it's a win-win for the big pharmaceutical companies, big win-win for the big, huge multinationals.
if viewers want to follow up on this further, they could look a little bit back in history to the period 2008 to 2013 and the H1N1 pandemic and the investigations that occurred afterwards. And the Council of Europe produced an analysis report on the response to H1N1 at a global level. And that report found that pharmaceutical companies unduly influenced the global response and the World Health Organization response to H1N1 or swine flu, as it was more commonly known, that they influenced their response to it, that they exaggerated the threat of H1N1, and they drove forward vaccine programs and plans that were essentially useless. That report came out in 2013 from the Council of Europe, and still we were railroaded into this way of responding once more. In fact, doubled down on this way of responding to an alleged pandemic from 2020 onwards as well. So we see Margaret Chan, no doubt about what she's saying in this video. It's very, very clear that private corporations and private individuals control the works and determine the aims and objectives of the World Health Organization and what it spends its money on. Any final comment before we move on, Peter?
No, I suppose we just have to be vigilant. I suppose, aware of what's happening, aware of how fragile our individual freedom is and how it can be taken with such a piece of legislation or by something like a digital passport.
Yeah. Okay, we're going to watch this space. We're going to see how these things roll out. No doubt, if this vaccine passport at a global level is rolled out, it seems like that's the way they're going. It's probably going to be used very soon. I have no doubt that there is going to be another pandemic announcement within the next 10 years. And this vaccine passport at a global level, this system is going to be rolled out on top of other systems that are being put in place at the moment. Peter, you also wanted to look at another story this week, an Irish story again, in relation to the government being fined by the EU, being fined for the sum of, I think it's €1.5 million for not accommodating asylum seekers when they arrived on Irish shores. Do you want to talk to us a little bit about that story?
Yeah, so this was a headline on The Independent here during the week, that the government now is to be fined €1.5 million by the European Union for failing to accommodate 300 refugees in Ireland. So I suppose just on the whole immigration issue and on the refugee issue, Roger O'Gorman, who was the Minister for Integration, he put out a tweet there a number of months ago, and he advertised in several different languages for asylum seekers and refugees to come to Ireland. And at that time, he promised the sun, moon, and stars to these people. So obviously, people started coming to Ireland, people who needed refuge, people who needed asylum. Maybe some of them didn't need refuge, didn't need asylum, but they were saying, hey, Ireland is the place to go. So obviously, over the last number of months now, we've seen a huge amount of asylum seekers, a huge amount of refugees coming into the country, and a huge amount of economic immigrants as well. I think there were a quotation there from last year that was it over 360,000 PPS numbers were issued, and less than a quarter of them for actually for Irish residents. So that kind of tells you how much immigration, internal immigration.
Figures were just around 300,000 issued altogether. 27,000 were for Irish people. At the time that I looked at, there was 60,000 or so for Ukrainian refugees, and there was 220,000 people that were not accounted for from the point of view that a lot of them look like they're coming from France and Spain for Irish PPS numbers, but they're actually applicants, third country applicants, which means they came from North Africa or somewhere else. They came to Spain maybe 6 months ago, got a number, and then moved from Spain on to Ireland. So there is a significant number of people coming into the country. The advertisements that were put out around the world, they were also advertised, the ones that you're talking about that Roger O'Gorman put out basically inviting people to come to Ireland. It was also put out in countries like Georgia and many countries in which there is no humanitarian crisis, or there is no accepted reasoning behind people seeking refuge or asylum from those particular countries. So a lot of it doesn't make sense. And to my mind personally, these invitations were extended on the basis of looking for cheap labour into the future. Because we looked at a story about a drop in GDP and a drop in GNP, but if we look behind these headlines, quite often what we see is some of the excuses behind it is that we're not meeting the labour demand, and so that's concerning as well, because it doesn't matter what the labour demand is if you don't have the services and the homes for people. I just want to keep on this story as well, to point out that maybe a year ago, a little bit more than a year ago now, the Minister for Justice, Helen McEntee, had announced that she would be documenting the undocumented in Ireland. And this is so people from other countries outside of Europe who were undocumented in Ireland, there was a process being put in place for them to become documented. And that was, again, an open invitation for people to come to Ireland to become documented within the EU, and to be legalised within the EU, as it were. So, and especially from the UK, and I do know that there was an influx of people from the UK claiming to be asylum seekers, claiming to be refugees, and in doing so, there are people now blaming asylum seekers and refugees for this situation. And a part of that problem is because there are people who are claiming refuge and asylum who are not genuine. Another problem is that the government have opened us up to take in so many people who feel that the working class will feel that they're in conflict with them in terms of for resources and things like that. The people who come here are the last people to be blamed, to be honest with you, in my mind, Peter, because they came here with promises of, as you said, those advertisements, promises of open, own door accommodation. You know what I mean? Who wouldn't come here?
Yeah, no, I would not blame any immigrant coming to this country. It's not the immigrants' fault. It's not the refugees' fault. It's not the asylum seekers' fault. The blame lies with our government. You wouldn't need to be Mystic Meg to predict what was going to happen, and what we predicted was going to happen has happened. And it was the word unlimited was the problem, because they said, and this is still the government's position, that we are taking unlimited numbers of asylum seekers, refugees, and immigrants. Now, we're a country of 5 million people. We're a small country in the scheme of things. We cannot take unlimited numbers of immigrants into this country. We have to have a cap on the amount of asylum seekers. We have to have a cap on the amount of refugees we can take, because we have to take care of our own country as well. And obviously, at the moment, we don't have the accommodation at this moment in time to accommodate all these people. But in no way would I ever blame these people who come here for this. The blame lies with our government, and they must be held to account. And then just on that headline there, so the European Union now is fining us 1.5 million euros. So this is another violation, in my opinion, of our own nation's sovereignty. Like, who is the European Union to be dictating how many people we take or don't take? It's just outrageous, in my opinion.
Well, I think if we're straight about it, again, our politicians are to blame, because they have signed us up for international agreements such as the Marrakesh Compact and other international agreements to actually take in massive amounts of people who are coming to the country. Just on this subject, I'm going to move on then, Padraig. There was also a case a couple of months ago in the High Court in which a young Afghan asylum seeker took a High Court case. I'm sure that he was assisted and encouraged by somebody in Ireland to do so, but took a High Court case against the government because they didn't provide him with accommodation, etc., when he arrived. And he won that case, and he's due another hearing soon to award him compensation. And this is another worrying development. It just seems that whatever the Irish government does, it's to the detriment of the state in so many ways. So here we now have the state open to compensation claims from people who are asylum seekers. So if I was an asylum seeker in France, or even an economic migrant in France at the moment, or in Spain, or in England, or anywhere at all, and I saw that I could go to Ireland, and if I didn't get accommodation, I'd do compensation, I'd be on the next flight over here. And again, human nature, not blaming the people themselves in general, but blaming the politicians for this kind of crap. What do you make of this story? Getting compensation for not getting accommodation. Wouldn't compensate our own.
It's absolute lunacy, isn't it, Finbar? It's absolute scandalous. Yeah, no, there's no words can't describe it. The headline speaks for itself.
Yeah. The madness continues as well, Peter. A story that you wanted to raise again is the issue of this cattle cull, which is a headline that has been making more international news, I think, than news in Ireland itself, which is the usual here in Ireland. Anything that's to be criticised, Ireland will be the last place that you hear it. We'll just have a look at this story, and I'll let you lead with it, Peter. Cull of Ireland's dairy cattle.
Yeah, so this is, we live in crazy times, Finbar, don't we? So the news here during the week was that 200,000 dairy cows now are to be culled, so that we can meet our climate change targets in Ireland. So, like, in my mind, this is absolute insanity. And I suppose I just go back to 6 months previous here. Simon Coveney, he came to Mitchelstown. The Fine Gael had a convention there in Mitchelstown where all the big shots were there. You Simon Coveney, Martin Hayden, Deirdre Clune, MEP, David Stanton, all the big shots were there, and they were promoting Fine Gael as the party that represents rural Ireland. But I stood up and I challenged Minister Coveney on specifically the Climate Action Bill in 2021, which every Fine Gael TD voted for. And I said that it was a direct attack on Ireland. And Minister Coveney, he was giving me, responding to my accusations and with a lot of waffle. And then I interjected and I said, "You're going to cull Irish cows and cattle." And he replied back to me, he said, "No, we are not." So roll on 6 months later, and this is what's happening. 200,000 dairy cows are to be culled, and the government are going to pay 600 million euros to cover the cost of this cull. So
hold on a wee minute, Peter. And what we'll do is we'll have a look at that video of you challenging Coveney, Minister Coveney, on this issue. We'll come back in a minute.
Why do you want to cull Irish cows and beef? So
you don't want to cull Irish cows.
That's one of the proposals.
Is that the way in which we respond to the climate change is not to produce less food.
So that was yourself a few months ago tackling Coveney on this issue. He was pretty adamant there that it wasn't going to happen. It looks like it is going to happen. And as you say, there's 600 million being allocated initially to compensate farmers. Is this... So we see, look at this headline, Cull of Ireland's dairy cattle for climate. This is the Irish Times. Cull of Ireland's dairy cattle for climate targets should be voluntary, farmers say. And again, that language, isn't this the way they mix it up? And the thin end of the wedge is it's going to be voluntary. But eventually, it won't be voluntary. When they get all the low-hanging fruit, well, then they'll start to make it mandatory. Do you think that's a threat?
Oh, yeah. So at the moment, they're going to dangle the carrot in front of the farmers. The 40 pieces of silver for the farmers to destroy their own industry, the largest indigenous industry in Ireland. And then when the carrot will not work any longer, they'll start using the stick. That's what I would think will happen.
Okay. You're out on video again this week from County Cork. So that was a video from a few months ago. You put this out this week from County Cork Harbour, and it's in relation to NATO vessels coming into Cork Harbour. We'll have a look at this video. We'll come back in a minute.
Hello everybody, hope you're all keeping well this evening. I'm here above in Cork Harbour, and as you can see, there's 3 NATO warships here moored in Cork Harbour behind me. So the question I would put is, why is there 3 NATO warships moored in Cork Harbour this evening? At this time, there is obviously a war going on at this time between NATO and between Russia. We have a position of this country officially as a neutral country. We officially don't get involved in wars, we don't get involved in conflict. we are pro-peace, we are pro-diplomacy. So why is there 3 NATO warships in our harbour here in Cork this evening? And more importantly, who invited these NATO warships into our harbour? That is the big question, because as we can see, regards our government, regards what they're doing at the moment, the people of Ireland have expressed over and over again unanimously that the Irish people want nothing to do with NATO, want nothing to do with war, want nothing to do with destruction and death. So why is our government ignoring the people of Ireland? That is the question. So, as I've said many times before, we live in a democratic country. Democracy means people power.
Peter, do you want to elaborate on what you were doing in Cork Harbour this week?
Yeah, so earlier this week I was notified that there was 3 French NATO war ships sailing up the River Lee into Cork Harbour. So we organised quickly and we went up there to see what was happening and just to highlight what was happening. And on Horgan's Quay, which will be right in the centre of Cork City, there was 3 French NATO ships, and they were moored there in Horgan's Quay. So this isn't the first time that we've had NATO ships going into Cork Harbour over the last number of months. We've had Dutch NATO ships, we've had Canadian ships, we've had French, we've had several different ships sailing up the River Lee and positioning themselves right in the city centre. So obviously at this moment in time there is a war happening in the Ukraine. Now it's being said by the media it's a war between Ukraine and Russia, but we can all see and anybody can see that this is a proxy war between NATO and between Russia. So NATO are at war at the moment, and we're a neutral country. Apparently, we have a policy of neutrality in this country. Apparently, we don't get involved in wars, and here we are now with NATO warships sailing up the River Lee into the city, into the centre of Cork City, at a time when NATO is at war. So this, in my opinion, and it's a direct violation of our policy of neutrality. And I suppose the big question for me is who permitted these ships to come up into Cork City, up the River Lee, and maybe who invited these ships to come in.
Isn't it infuriating, Peter, that one of the most solid and shared prides that the Irish people have had since the foundation of the state is our neutrality, and that the Irish government are obviously and clearly signing that away in secret agreements where we can see the physical presence of NATO and of international war in our harbours, and I'm sure the stuff happening on our lands as well, in our training areas, our military training areas, and even in our hospitals. And this has all been done while they're snubbing their nose and giving the 2 fingers to the Irish people. And I find it absolutely infuriating. And the Irish government's reply has been to hold these, which they haven't held yet, but they're planned for the end of this month and the beginning of next month, wishy-washy public seminars and consultation seminars in which they're just going to plough ahead anyway, rather than dealing with this the way it should be dealt with through a referendum. What do you think?
Yeah, so the Irish people have said over and over and again, the vast majority of Irish people do not want to get involved in wars. They do not want to get involved with NATO. They do not want to get involved with the European Union army. They want to continue being a country of diplomacy and a country of peace. And we have peacekeepers in this country who've travelled all over the world keeping the peace. And now, because of our position of getting involved with NATO, these people, it presents a threat to these people because they're not seen as peacekeepers now anymore. We're seen as a country that's picking a side. So why is the government going against the will of the Irish people? Do we not live in a democracy? In a democracy, doesn't the majority get to say? Why is the government going against the will of the Irish people?
And we know it is the will because polls over the years have shown that strong support for neutrality. But even very recently, last week, an Ipsos poll was published showing 80% of the Irish people were in favour of a ceasefire and an immediate negotiated settlement of the war in Ukraine, which is against the EU position, which is against the NATO position, and yet it is the position of the Irish people. And when we look at the polls of the public right across Europe, that is the position. And people want peace. But what we're seeing, not only internationally, but in our own waters, on our own lands, we're seeing war being stoked with the intention that we will eventually join NATO. And in this big global war that they're planning, which is becoming more obvious by the day, planning a war with China, pushing this war with Russia, eventually they will be conscripting your sons and daughters, your grandchildren, to be sent off as cannon fodder. And we see that even over the last few days in Ukraine, the way the Ukrainian government have been throwing in thousands of troops into minefields, into artillery barrages, and their suicide missions. And they want to do that to the young people of this country.
Yeah. And let's not forget why we picked the position of neutrality in this country. It comes from World War I, when 250,000 Irishmen were sent to the Battle of the Somme, and over 50,000 of them lost their lives for nothing, absolutely nothing. And that is why Eamon de Valera, for all his faults, he actually pushed for a neutral Ireland, and
no,
that's
why it wasn't necessarily for nothing, Peter, because there's a lot of people made a lot of money, especially the arms industry, which seems to control the United States government at the moment, to the point where they're essentially their defense minister, the Secretary for Defense, is an ex-head of Raytheon, which is the main missile and weapons producer, global weapons producer based in the United States. Peter, we're going to go on to our last report now, our last story. It's a sad one. There's a tweet put out by Peadar Tóibín, head of Aontú, or leader of the Aontú political party, a couple of days ago, where he was speaking about the number of homeless people who died in Dublin since the start of the year. Let's just have a look at this particularly sad tweet. Statistics released to me under FOI showed that 20 people died in homelessness in Dublin this year so far. It's chilling that over 2/3 of these deaths were people younger than me. That's a sad statistic, and it's only the first 6 months, not even of the year. The worst of the coming winter has to come, and I'm sure the national figures will be equally, if not more, shocking. I remember a few years ago writing an article in which I said, I hope to never see it, but it would appear someday we'll be counting over 100 homeless dead a year. I think we've reached and exceeded that figures in certain years over the last few years. What's your opinion on these terrible figures, Peter?
Yeah, it's extremely sad. You know, that we've people living on the streets of Ireland. Apparently, we're a prosperous nation. Why do we have anybody living in the streets of Ireland, especially our own citizens? I think the figures are over 12,000 homeless now in our country. Just was it last year, the year before, went over 10,000, and there was outrage. Now we're over 12,000, and remember, there's a lot of women and children involved in this as well. So we can make huge commitments here to accommodate foreign citizens and foreign nationals in this country, but why can't we accommodate Irish citizens? Why can't we put the same effort into that? It's startling, isn't it?
Well, there's at least 300,000 hidden homeless in the Irish Republic as well. And if you look at the European Union definitions of homelessness, in that case, the asylum seekers, the refugees that are here in all those centres, they are officially homeless here in Ireland as well. You add it up, what, 500,000 homeless people in Ireland? When you add it all up, when you take in the hidden homeless, the people on the streets, the people in emergency accommodation, asylum seekers, refugees, immigrants that we don't know about who've come here to work, who maybe even got visas and that to come here and work, and we don't know where they're living. It's just a terrible situation. We've been reporting on it for years now. It's just getting worse and worse by the day. We will watch it. We will report on it. But I have to say, something's got to give at some point. We need to get answers to the housing crisis, to the services crisis, and to the crisis of looking into what looks like a recession, as we reported at the beginning of the program, and the scare or the fear that we move in towards potential economic degradation into the future, and yet we still have all of these needs and these demands that have to be met.
What I'd be thinking, apparently, these are the good times. Our nation is doing very well at this time, according to the media. What happens when the bad times come? What happens when we see a huge regression in our economy? What happens then? If we're seeing so many homeless these days, what happens? In another few years when we see where we're seeing the recession now, but when it really kicks in, this recession, when we see the interest rates really kicking in, when we see our huge national debt, the payments for that really kicking in, what happens then? Like if the weakest in our society are living like this at the same time, how will the weakest in our society and the poorest in our society be living in another few years?
I fully agree with you, Peter. Real change is needed. I don't know if it's going to come. I don't know if it's going to come in time. We can only hope and pray, and we can only do our bit through speaking in our own media like this and trying to get these ideas and this news and these predictions out to people so that they can put pressure on their political representatives to do something, or maybe to replace their political representatives into the near and the medium future. That's all we have for this week, folks. Thanks for tuning in. Like, share, subscribe where you can. Thanks for joining us, Peter.
Yeah, thank you, Finbar.